Your Creative Push, episode 337.
You can do it. You may be surprised what you can do if you have a passion for something and you aren't afraid to take that risk.
Welcome to Your Creative Push, the podcast that pushes you to pursue your creative passions. I'm your host, Youngman Brown, and my guest today is Nick Ulivieri. Nick is a commercial photographer based in Chicago who specializes in shooting architecture, real estate, food, and hospitality. And Nick comes on the show today to talk all about his creative journey, his creative process, and how a trip to Italy sparked his interest in photography and led him into becoming a professional photographer. Nick talks about what it was like in the early days of his photography career, the importance of design, messaging, and consistency of voice, and how he got clients when he first started out, and how he gets them now. Nick also shares how he fell into the specialty of taking photographs of architecture, and how he finds ways to give the same structures and landscapes a new feel. Nick also shares the experience of walking that tightrope between having a business and also wanting to be a creative person, and his thoughts and advice for growing a following on Instagram. And finally, my favorite part of the whole interview, my discussion with him about what it's like to be in a helicopter shooting photographs. I totally geeked out about that fact. But without further ado, please sit back and enjoy my conversation with photographer Nick Ulivieri. Nick, welcome to Your Creative Push, man.
Thanks for having me.
No, thanks so much for being here. You take some breathtaking photos, and my wife is interested in photography as well, and she likes to do landscapes and stuff like that.
Awesome.
But what you do with your kind of architecture photos especially is really breathtaking, especially from some of the very unique views that you get. So I'm really interested to getting into your work today.
Yeah, I'll be happy to talk about that.
Cool, man. Before we do, though, I always like to give my guests the opportunity at the start to sort of give a brief bio, sort of how you got to the point you are today in your creative career.
Sure. So where to start? I guess we can start. Let's start in 2009. I've always been a pretty creative person. I took a lot of art classes. I drew, I colored, I painted, and kind of all through high school. And once college came, for whatever reason, I started majoring in chemistry. I really like science, but for some reason I thought, majoring in chemistry would be cool in college. That didn't work out so well. And then eventually I transferred to Bradley University and I got a degree in marketing. After I graduated with that, I joined a small ad shop downtown Chicago. It's now defunct, which, and it turned out to be a blessing because it allowed me to get where I am today. But I sort of learned, the business side of creativity in a commercial sense. We had a lot of clients that we had to do creative for, public relations, it was all sorts of kind of those interesting things that creatives get to work on, in a business sense. And that was fun for a while, but it wasn't really doing it for me, more so because I was more on the PR side of things, and that was just not my jam. I took no for an answer way too easy back then, at least. And, it doesn't really fly if you're, trying to pitch clients and new products and concepts. But then we took a trip to Italy. My dad's from Italy, so we went to see some family, and I brought a camera along. And, during that trip, I just started taking photos, and I couldn't stop taking photos. And, kind of photography as a interest / hobby sort of literally clicked with me on that trip. And when I came back, I couldn't stop taking photos. And around that same time, the agency I was working for was slowly losing staff. The writing was on the wall that things weren't looking good. And I started working from home. And so I took more photos when I wasn't doing some of the work I probably should have been doing. And a family friend saw some photos I had shared online and he wanted to hire me to take some construction update photos of a project on Michigan Avenue. They were reglazing the realtor building. So they were taking all the old windows off, putting new windows on, and redoing this concrete plaza. And because I was working from home and that other job, like I was getting less and less stuff to work on from my boss. So I had more free time to fill. And I started taking photos of that project, and I was starting to get paid for photography. And, I fell in love with the idea. And then, as even less and less work came my way, I sort of realized, this was my opportunity to take a chance on something crazy. And I quit that job and I opened up my own photography business. And that was in September of 2010. So from then on, I've basically kind of been taking photos all over the city and suburbs for a variety of industries, or I guess organizations related to kind of the architecture and real estate industry. So yeah, I mean, that's kind of the gist of it.
Very cool. And I want to go back to the transition part, but
sure.
Before we actually get to that, I wanted to go back even further to that trip where it kind of, I guess, for lack of a better term, like accidentally started for you, like where
Yes.
it's like, oh, I'm just going to take some photographs, and then it just like kind of became like a joy and like an obsession. What was it about the act of taking photographs that really, like you said, clicked for you? Like, was it finding the perfect scene to take a picture of, or was it like looking back at the photographs?
That's an interesting question. I mean, I think it was really cool just to kind of get that instant gratification on the back of the camera, and kind of see what you captured and know that I knew that I was documenting this trip better than I otherwise would have if I wasn't interested in it. And I just started capturing these scenes, and I personally thought the photos were really cool, and I still look back at some of those photos, even now, and it's kind of neat to see both my, how far I've come, but also to still see sort of those seeds of the techniques and style that I still have to this day. But yeah, I mean, it was just kind of great to be able to capture those moments, both the architecture of Italy, the food, the people. There were a lot of things I shot then that I don't shoot as much now, especially because it was so new to me at the time. I didn't know what I was doing, and sometimes it's kind of, that's, sort of fun. Ignorance is kind of bliss sometimes when you're learning something new.
Right, exactly. Ignorance is bliss.
Yeah. I don't know if that's like the best thing to say, but
no.
It isn't always, but sometimes it's nice.
No, ignorance. It's especially nice when the path that you have to take requires so much learning or so much struggle. If you knew that ahead of time, you might not have, quit your job to go down that journey.
Right.
And I also, like, my favorite stories, like on this podcast, are stories where the thing that you end up doing because you love is something that you start without the expectation of it becoming like a career, like without the expectation of like, all right, like, oh, cool. Like I took my first few photographs in Italy. Well, maybe I should turn this into a career. Maybe like, how can I make money off of this? No, just doing it and then kind of stumbling into that opportunity where somebody who saw your photographs asked you for basically a gig. Was that a paid gig?
It was, yeah, which was really awesome. I mean, it wasn't much, but it was enough at the time to make it worth my while and at least feel like there was value to what I was doing, because at the time, it's one thing to hear that people like your work and you get likes and comments on social media, but, when people actually want to pay you to do that, obviously there's a sense of validation that what you're doing has value, and that, means a lot.
Right. And it's also that like proof of concept, actually trading your time and your skill and your passion for an actual paycheck, however small it might be. I'm always trying to like promote people to, like, no matter how small your following is, like just, on a piece of art that you post that you don't necessarily want to keep forever, just say this item is for sale. And just get that first thing going. That gives you that proof of concept and that confidence that, okay, I did it once, I can do it again. I can
Right.
get
And
better and start charging more. And like, that's like how things start with that little, like snowflake that will eventually avalanche, you know?
exactly.
So let's get into then making the actual transition from the PR job that wasn't fully fulfilling you to
Hmm.
doing what was fulfilling you. Were you at that point making enough on the side to justify it, or did you kind of just cut loose and then just
Yeah, I mean that like that was like like out of college, like intro level job. So it's not like I was I wasn't making bank or anything. I mean, I was lucky that my wife had a full time job and she was in marketing as well. So she was able to really kind of support us through those first few years while I kind of built up my client base and went from kind of lost profits to finally making profits. So, I mean, it was tough, but, I'm lucky that I had a support system that allowed me to kind of test the waters because it was, it wasn't easy. It was cool to get new projects and new clients, but that early on, I would get paid for things and I would quote projects and I didn't know if I was really making money or if I was losing money. And paychecks are great, but then you're like, oh, got to take taxes out of this, and you have to pay, web hosting fees, and you have equipment, and you're sort of learning the business side on the fly. And I'm lucky too that I went to school for marketing and I had a business background education wise, and I worked at the PR ad shop that gave me a feel for, working with and interfacing with clients and proposing projects. But it's still totally different when you actually have to do it. Taking a multiple choice test, in sales and marketing is not the same as actually having to put together a proposal and justify your costs and kind of forge a relationship with a client that wants to work with you on a consistent basis.
right? Well, and kind of keeping on the theme of marketing, how did that help you? You mentioned already that it helped you in your photography business, but how specifically did your background help you going forward?
It's funny because sometimes I try and look back on college, which is now like 12 or 13 years ago, and I don't remember a whole lot of specifics in terms of all these the business terms and all the economy classes and whatnot. But I think what I learned from those classes and some of the projects I had to do was just how important sort of design and messaging and having a consistent kind of appearance and voice to your brand can do so much to what your brand is trying to achieve in terms of whatever its business goals are. And what's nice about that is those aren't so numbers focused. Like I could never be an accountant. I could never be in sales projecting budgets and projecting in cash flows and all that stuff. Like that is not the business part of me. Like I'm definitely the creative side, but just kind of dabbling in those made me it helped me know what I had to or at least kind of that education sort of informed me on the things I needed to learn. So it's like I sort of knew what I didn't know, and I was able to learn those things as I kind of progressed in my career.
Right, that makes sense. Now, I guess starting out, how did you get clients, and has that kind of evolved over time?
Yeah, I mean, starting out, it was a lot of word of mouth. So that first client I had, he was a developer. And it's just sometimes you get lucky breaks. He had a lot of pretty good connections, and he was able to introduce me to some other like-minded people who also, needed photos of their buildings or interior photos of properties that they were trying to rent or lease or sell. And some of those clients panned out, some didn't. But kind of outside of the professional work I was doing, because I didn't have that many clients at the time, I also just went out and shot around the city a lot. So, the cityscape architecture of Chicago is fun to photograph. But at the same time, a lot of the personal work I was doing and sharing on social media at the time I was sort of like I was building my social network at the same time, kind of indirectly promoting my services just by, practicing my craft around the city and sharing the photos I took. So, I started to get noticed that way. And a lot of times I would reach out to businesses and developers or architects or contracting firms who were building buildings to ask if they needed photos, or trying to get access onto sites to take photos and, see where that may lead. So there were a lot of different mechanisms I used to get new clients. And now, I'm a lot of the times, most of the time, I have a lot of repeat clients, which is great. I mean, it's really hard to put a value on how awesome it is to have a repeat client. Just, being able to work with the same person on multiple projects is, it's just hard to overstate how great it is, because it, makes things so much easier. But a lot of those clients refer me, or prospective clients see my work because my other clients are using them, and then they inquire about me. So I think more now it's kind of a referrals and word of mouth, and a little bit less of me kind of going out there and trying to get clients.
And you mentioned on your personal work and your personal Instagram, they kind of go hand in hand with the photographs you're taking for businesses.
Right.
Now, what was it that really led you to architecture, especially? Was that based on the demand for that?
I would say it was just sort of the passion I had for architecture that I didn't even know I had quite at the time. I guess there was a demand too, and it was something I started shooting. I really enjoyed shooting. I felt like it fit my personality better, because I've never really been good with working with people and models, or, headshots or weddings. For a long time, I got requests to do that earlier on, and I took on a few like event type projects. When I was first starting out, you just kind of, you say yes to just about everything, because you need to, to pay bills, and you need to sort of experiment to see what works and what doesn't. But I learned really quickly that I just did not enjoy kind of taking photos of people, because they were unpredictable. And I just felt like I was kind of an intruder when I was in certain events, or, working with people directly. So, architecture fits me personally. And, even before I started taking photos, I kind of started getting really interested in Chicago's architecture back when the Chicago Spire, which was to be this really, really cool 2,000-foot tower right at the mouth of the river, was about to be built. And I just thought it was so cool that Chicago was going to get this big tower. And I started to go on like skyscraper websites and forums, and I kind of got interested in the construction processes and engineering of, skyscraping towers, and, really all kind of structures that are kind of built in, the modern day urban environment. And that sort of just kind of dovetailed well with the photos I started to take in the city, so, Chicago is a great place to take photos of architecture, and it just sort of all fell into place.
Right. And Chicago's a big city, but do you ever find yourself struggling to find a new angle, a new subject matter?
Yeah, all the time. I mean, it is big, but I love the steel and glass skyscrapers. So as big as the city is, the parts I like to photograph, are relatively small compared to the entire acreage that is Chicago. We have a lot of great neighborhoods, but I spent most of my professional time downtown, in the Loop along the river, where there's a lot of new construction. And yeah, it's definitely tough to find fresh vantage points, but there are a lot of buildings, there's a lot of rooftops, there's a lot of windows, so that is, one of the challenges I face in a lot of the professional projects I do is kind of learning the new sight lines and vistas that certain buildings are going to have once they're built. But, kind of going back and shooting the same places often helps me understand that better as well. So there's always different light, storms can make the same angle look totally different. The ice and snow we get in winter is totally different than, the beautiful summers and falls we have. So, while it is harder and harder to get new vantage points, there's always different light and new buildings going up that sort of change those view corridors too. So, but yeah, it is hard to kind of continually churn out kind of fresh new stuff that people haven't seen before.
Right. Definitely a challenge, but I guess like when all else fails, go up in a helicopter.
yeah, that definitely, that can yield some really, really cool stuff. But, even I found, earlier when the first time I ever flew, I photographed a golf course from above, which was a really cool project. And, I still do, this outside of the stuff I do downtown, I fly a lot of stuff in the suburbs for like brokers who are selling like strip malls or developments or even big office campuses. I've shot from above, but even over the city, it's even though you're in 3D space, the skyline can look pretty similar. So again, it's a matter of kind of trying to catch interesting and different light at different times of day to sort of make those what can sometimes become repetitive views stand out and look different.
So do you have like a buddy that flies? Like how does that whole process work? So
there are a couple providers in the city who run tours, but there are, it's kind of surprising how many different things helicopters are used for, in the city. Obviously tours are, a great thing to do, but, sometimes these people, my providers will fly people to, they'll like inspect, like oil tankers kind of in the industrial part of the city or inspect power lines. It's just kind of interesting how many different things happen in a helicopter. But so there's providers who are willing and able to sort of do whatever is needed, and I'll typically work with the pilot and kind of charter a custom flight based on my project's needs. We'll take the doors off so that we don't need to shoot through the Lexan plastic and. It's awesome. It's really cool to, kind of sort of direct the pilot where to go, but it's challenging too, because you're constantly moving and you are literally moving, you have 3 dimensions to work with, and you're also usually on a time crunch because, especially in a helicopter, time is money. So you kind of have to get things done quick and efficiently. But I will say, flying with the doors off isn't as scary as you might think. I actually I've gotten a lot better, but I've had a pretty terrifying fear of heights for a good chunk of my life. I actually had a panic attack in Italy on that trip back in 2009, but somehow the helicopter is different. I don't know. It's kind of like being in an airplane where you're almost like you sort of feel separate from the scene. So you don't really kind of realize how crazy it all actually is in a way. When the camera's pressed up to my face, I kind of am able to forget and not think too much about what's going on around me.
Right. I also imagine that, just like you said, it's a time crunch. So like you have a mission to do,
right?
And you're also like doing the thing that you love, which has to help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I have had a few, even, when I go on construction sites, I climb up to some pretty precarious areas, and I haven't really had too many issues aside from the last time I was in a tower crane. But,
Oh God.
Those things move and sway and torque and twist and make a lot more noises than they look like they do when they're on the ground. I mean, I got it up pretty high, but the guy who was chaperoning me was like, "Hey, yeah, we could, we only have to climb a few more segments. We can go in the cab. You can climb out to the end of the jib." I was like, "No, I'm good. Maybe next time." I think, I might just need to sit up here on this perch for an hour and get used to the feeling before I kind of made any progress
proceeding.
trying to explore anywhere else.
Right. Just one more question, just out of curiosity from about the helicopters. Sure. So are you like hanging off the edge like a commando, like a SEAL, or are you like strapped in?
It depends on the type of helicopter. So one time we were in New York and we flew this big this A-Star, and basically that, I mean, it kind of looks like a Black Hawk. It's a big. It has sort of a cavernous midsection, and I had to like slide open the door mid-flight, and I was harnessed in, so I could sit on the edge if I wanted to, but I didn't need to. When I fly downtown, we're in a smaller R44. And it's really it's a normal seat with, almost just like a car seat belt. And again, because it's a really cozy little space, you can just sort of lean out to your left a little bit, and you really have just kind of a full panoramic view. So no sort of hanging out or off is necessary.
But you're facing forward though, so you have to be turning.
Yes. Yeah.
Does that hurt after a while?
It can get a little cramped, but you can swivel, if you swivel a little bit to your left, it's not too bad. And because I'm not, it's not like I have to shoot totally to my left. Like you don't really have to like torque your whole body to get out and point out. But yeah, usually for like the flights that are about, usually it's no longer than like 15 or 20 minutes. So it's not like you're in that kind of contorted position for 2 hours or anything like that.
Okay. Sorry for all the helicopter questions. No. Just, I know I'm never going to do it. So I might as well live vicariously through you and get a good image of it. I wanted to kind of go back to Instagram.
Okay.
Kind of talking about like curating feeds, and maybe this will be helpful for people listening. As you're doing personal work and stuff like that, do you ever find yourself wanting to take a photograph of something and not, because it won't like fit into your feed, like your kind of theme that you've built for yourself and your style? Or if you do end up taking those photographs, do you leave them out?
Yeah, I take so many more photos that never make it to Instagram. I'm like if I go out on a flight, I may come away with 40 or 50 like cool, unique images, but I might post one that night to Instagram and then another one 9 or 10 days later. Like Instagram, I kind of like post one photo at a time, whereas like on Twitter, I may share a link to the Flickr gallery I put with like 14 of my favorite shots, or Facebook, I'll post more, or, on my website where I host and back up all my photos, there's the full gallery. But Instagram's a little bit different, where maybe 14 of those aerial photos will get posted over the course of a year and a half, because I like to just mix it up and try and keep each photo kind of apart from everything else. So I like when my feed kind of looks random and nice and has a mix of images and colors. I typically won't post like 4 photos from the same shoot, 4 days in a row.
And now, do you plan that out? Like, do you have some sort of tool that helps you plan that, or do you just kind of dive into your cache of photographs?
Yeah, pretty much. Like, I use Zenfolio to back up all my stuff. So, sometimes I'll open up the app and just thumb through, various sets and galleries I have looking for photos. Or sometimes I anytime I export photos from a particular shoot, I'll export a handful to Dropbox. That's just like my Instagram folder that, I'll thumb through that sometimes looking for a photo. And, I really like when I prefer to, shoot something new and have, new content to share as opposed to going back into the archives. But, this time of year is kind of tough because like the excitement and fun of what was a really cold, intense, beautiful winter is worn off. And I mean, kind of the beginning of March isn't the most exciting time to go out and shoot kind of that fresh spring feel of Chicago. So we're kind of in the doldrums a little bit where I'm reaching back into my archives looking for cool stuff and, just pining for spring and spring storms and and everything starts to look green and alive again.
Right. Well, do you have any other tips for any, I guess, photographers, but also anybody that wants to build their following on Instagram or any other social media that you have a presence on, and or wants to kind of start their own business or start to make sales?
Let's see. I mean, with social media, it's tough. It's tough to offer tips because I feel like things have changed so much. And maybe it's just because I've been on them for long enough that I feel like growth has sort of stagnated and, people aren't following people as much as they used to because everyone who's on it already sort of has their, the network that they like and the people that they know. And I mean, I follow people here and there, but the Instagram community in Chicago is, I've met a lot of people through, like, we've had a lot of meetups and people know people and they go out and shoot with people. But in terms of like growing your following, you really have to kind of participate and contribute and comment and ask people interesting, engaging questions. And when there are opportunities to, go out and shoot with people and those, communities that do exist, in Chicago, we have Shy Texture and Shy Shooters and iGear Chicago, and there are people who kind of manage these accounts that feature the work of local photographers who use those hashtags, and they have photo meetups and events and portrait meets and sunrise meets. I've done a few as well where the community can kind of get together and hang out and shoot. And that's a really good way to, social media. It's kind of weird how at least through Instagram, it starts off as an app, but is sort of turned into a way to actually meet people in real life. It's actually kind of becoming truly social. But yeah, it's also tough to kind of jump in at this point. And I think kind of grow because what was the equivalent of the gold rush was in 2012, 2013 when all these new creatives were flocking to Instagram, and everyone was seeing so much new fresh creativity that people hadn't really seen before. But now once everyone starts to become a photographer, a lot of the stuff kind of looks the same and it's harder to stand out and find success if you haven't already. So I hate to be a buzzkill. I mean, there's a lot of people who I'm sure start out and have really cool stuff and will succeed and get way bigger followings than me. So I take it as a challenge to prove me wrong, I guess, that I'm not trying to deter anyone, but I mean, you have to work a lot harder at it now than I think you may have a few years back.
Sure. Yeah, that's why it's not as easy as just like, if you build it, they will come. If you post it, they will come. It does require hard work and dedication and also consistency.
Yeah.
Which is sometimes when things aren't going as fast as you want them to, or you're not at, your goal, whether it be followers or clients or whatever, by, a year, to just throw in the towel. But it does require that persistence.
It definitely does.
I wonder, do you have any resistances or things that try to hold you back on a daily basis as you're trying to put the work in and continue down your creative journey?
I mean, yes, because the creative journey is awesome because you get to create cool stuff, and that's the art, and then a lot of what I do, there's also the business side. So I can't always be as creative as I want, because more often than not, when a client is like reaching out to me, I sort of know what the end goal is. It's interesting photos of their building or property or whatever project it is they're working on. So, it kind of makes it hard. Sometimes the business side of photography is in of itself kind of a resistor. It kind of fights the creative artistic side, because,
Sure.
There's budgets and time constraints, and, the needs of the client. Like if, the client wants, kind of the hero shot of their building, and they need it for a marketing book that's going out to market in the first week of March, it probably means I have to somehow get a great shot of the building in February. And that's a lot harder to do when, there's probably snow on the ground. The salt is just kind of caked everything. There's no leaves on the trees. So, things like that can sort of hinder the creativity I could put into the work. But it also provides an opportunity, because then, you have to get creative with how you problem solve. So, kind of creative problem solving is, a whole other aspect to what is the photography business, because, you're not necessarily always able to be creative with the art, but how you are able to get the images with the limitations that are given to you either by the client or the weather or a handful of factors can kind of make things fun and interesting.
Yeah, sometimes like the most inspiring thing or the most rewarding thing is to have constraints when you do need to like solve problems. Then it's like you can scratch that creativity urge that you've had your whole life by being able to, like you said, problem solve and figure out a way to get through it.
And it's like the final product might not be what you ideally would have wanted to make, but it may have been the best possible end product that could have come out of what the hurdles that you had to deal with. So that is kind of fun. So that's a kind of an interesting way to sort of break through that creative barrier sometime, because that's sort of the blessing and the curse of the photography business, is that when your hobby and passion becomes a job, sometimes you are more focused on the business side of it than you are the artistic side. And it's great to be able to make money with your art, but sometimes the art you make is dictated by, or pretty much, if you do it full time, a lot of the art you make is kind of dictated by the client's needs and not necessarily your own creative style.
Right. That's always the tricky balance to find.
Yep.
Well, do you find that you're able to also get to that creative flow, I guess, so to speak, in the like editing process, like when after you've come home and you're in your warm house, and you have the time to kind of sit and work out some of the kinks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, because I sort of thought about like, what am I as a creative person? And really, if I look at myself against the entirety of creative peoples that, the internet and Twitter and Instagram has given us, I rank myself pretty low on the scale of how creative are you compared to the rest of the world. I'm constantly blown away by, just some of the things people, like artists and sculptors and, people who can really like, do it more so for the art of it than for the business. That, they can really kind of let their creativity flow. But I like to think of my creativity as a little more clinical. Like I know kind of what the end goal is and what the look I want, and I feel like sort of my creativity is a little more goal oriented, and I like to, again, kind of come back to that problem solving of how do I get this final product, be it, again, like so much of what I shoot is very architectural. It's straight up and down. It's, it's technical. It's, the fun part for me is kind of the technical side of getting those photos. It's, waiting on sun angles, knowing where shadows are going to fall, or I take advantage of, the kind of perfectly photogenic weather where you have, a nice mix of clouds in the sky. And it's like when all those things come together, the final product might just look like a building that's well lit, and you have a nice sky behind it, kind of all the technical stuff that went into making that is sort of, I feel like, where my creativity kind of shines more so than the artwork itself, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, it does. I would say less clinical and more of a mercenary. That's how I would describe it. Especially when you're flying in helicopters.
Yeah.
It's pretty badass.
Sweet. Yeah, it's fun.
You kind of mentioned before about, like the business, having to do work for a client that they have come up with a vision for you based on like your previous work and what they kind of see for, either their building or whatever it may be. And you don't necessarily get to express yourself or kind of be the boss that has the vision.
Right.
So I wonder, does that ever come into play? Do you ever have time to do purely personal work that's like yours and yours alone?
I do have time to do personal work, but not as much time as I used to. And, that is kind of the tough part of turning your passion into a business. It's as much success as I've found, using my photography to, help my clients tell their story. I have less and less time to just sort of go out and take photos of what I want to for what I want to. But it still means that when I am able to do it, though, it sometimes means a lot more, because I'm very goal oriented when it comes to the photos I take. I much like my clients give me a specific a charge or request of what they want to see. I always like to have a goal in mind when I go out and shoot. Like, I mean, sometimes I may wander around the city and take some photos, but if I don't have a specific desire or thing I'm trying to get, it's not as easy for me to fulfill that, my own creative desire, so to speak. So yeah, I mean, business of photography makes it harder to kind of enjoy photography on its most purest sense, but I still wouldn't trade what I do in order to kind of get that back, because it is really fun to create stuff for the clients I work with.
Right. That's something I hear all the time from almost all my guests that have, turned their passion into what they do to make money. And it sometimes becomes icky. It's like, oh, the thing that I love so much, like when I was in Italy, like somehow it feels like a job now.
Right. Well, I am pretty lucky though, that the stuff I love to photograph for my own personal, creative kind of outlet is also very closely aligned with the stuff I create for clients. So There are some overlaps where a client has a very particular need and it's something I desperately want to shoot. And, I'm usually not shooting projects that are like so outside of what I typically shoot that like it becomes, I wouldn't say a chore or like a drag. So I am lucky in that sense, but it is still tough when, you have a client project you have to execute, but the weather is, phenomenal. And, this other thing you've been wanting to photograph for so long, you can't go out and shoot because you have to, fill a specific need for your client, which at the end of the day still feels great when, they love the work you do. But, then you just have to try and wait for that next time. There's always going to be another photo opportunity. So it's not like, I mean, I guess sometimes there are, they say the once in a lifetime photos. So I shouldn't say that, but I don't think I can't think of anything yet that I've missed out on that I won't ever get another chance to catch. So right. Knock on wood.
I'm knocking for you.
Thanks.
Yeah. Plus, I'm sure you've received many opportunities as well because of a client that wants you like to go up in a helicopter, you know what I mean? And is going to pay for that. Then you get the opportunity to.
There are a lot of opportunities I've got that have been, amazing that I wouldn't have had otherwise. So it's a two-sided coin. Sometimes you get awesome opportunities and other times you have to put aside opportunities to fulfill the work that, the client's paying you to do, which is still, it's a good problem to have regardless of, which side of the coin you're looking at.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Very cool, man. Well, Nick, this has been a lot of fun, but it's time for the final push. And that's where I ask you to reach through the microphone, grab the shoulder of one of the listeners that you've already really inspired today, and just give them your best final words of advice and really push them to pursue their own creative passions.
All right. Let's see. I feel like I should have thought about this one a little more.
No, you're good.
I think that, if you are listening and you are creative and you have a passion to make things, don't be afraid to do so. And don't think that you can't succeed at doing whatever it is you want to do. When I look back at where I started, I wouldn't think I'd be where I am. And honest to God, most days I feel like I don't know what I'm doing. Imposter syndrome is real. And I think sometimes I don't even, I can't believe I actually run a business and have clients, and, you can do it. You may be surprised, what you can do if you have a passion for something and, you work hard at it and you aren't afraid to take that risk, because that's what I did. And, the anxiety of owning your own business sort of makes you work harder and do things you might not have thought you'd ever be able to do. So don't be afraid to try.
Absolutely. Yeah. The imposter syndrome never goes away for anybody.
No, it doesn't.
It's just,
I don't think I'll ever feel like I am successful, because you look around and see people who you think are more successful, and you never know what's happening. So, focus on yourself, do what you do best, and you can probably make it.
My man, Nick, dude, thank you so much for coming on the show today, for sharing your journey.
Pleasure.
And for sharing your advice. I really appreciate it, my friend.
For sure. I had a blast.
Me too, man. And for everybody listening, you can find Nick on his website, nuphoto.com. On Instagram, he is Nick_Ulivieri. That's Ulivieri. But no fear, we will have that all linked up at today's show notes page, yourcreativepush.com/337. Nick, thanks again.
Hey, my pleasure.
Big thank you to Nick once again for coming on the podcast. One of the biggest lessons from this episode came in the beginning, for me at least. I love those origin stories, especially when somebody's creative career started from a family trip or somewhere unexpected. You find this new love for something and you just dive in. But one of the key moments from Nick's story was when that family friend asked him to take some photographs for him, and he paid him for it. And I know that my instinct and a lot of other people's instinct, when you're starting something new and you don't feel like you're an expert in that field, you don't feel like you're an expert photographer, you're just messing around and having fun. If somebody sees that and sees that you have a talent for it and offers you money to do a shoot for them, whether it be for their business or for their family photos or whatever it is that you do in your creative life, or a new thing maybe that you're venturing into and trying out, and somebody offers you money, the initial instinct is to say, no, I don't do this for money. I've never received money for this. I'm clearly a fraud. I have the imposter syndrome crawling all over me. I couldn't possibly take your money for this. Try to resist that feeling. And I'm not saying that you can't do a favor for a family friend or anything like that. It's not like you have to take the money, but just shift your mindset a little bit to realize that maybe this is a path that I can go down to either earn some more money on the side or use the money that I'm earning to maybe take an advanced course in whatever it is that I'm learning, or to buy better materials, to buy a better camera, and to further this fun experience of learning this new thing and trying this new thing out, this thing that's really tickling my creative fancy. As you're starting something new, don't be humble. You have a creative brain, you have creative instincts, and people see that and they want a piece of that. So don't sell yourself short, and just be mindful of opportunities when they are presented to you. just because they might be presented to you in something that you're an amateur at and not something that you've spent the past decade devoting yourself to, creatively speaking. Jump on those opportunities because you never know where they will lead you. On our next episode, we have Tiffany Miller Russell. Tiffany is a wildlife artist and a natural history illustrator, and she makes these amazing and delightful paper sculptures that are created with found specialty papers. And she comes on the show next time for a great conversation about her creative process, how she started making these paper sculptures, and also how she has dipped her toes into many different fields, not just creative fields. If you want to find out more about Tiffany, you can head to her website, wildlifeinpaper.com, and on Facebook and Etsy, she is Wildlife in Paper. On Instagram, she is Tiffany Miller Russell, and we'll have all of those links linked up at yourcreativepush.com/337. But that's all I've got for you today, so hopefully you were inspired to go and get your work done, so go and get it done, and we will be here for you next time if you need that push again. I love you all so much. Have an amazing creative week or couple of weeks, and we will see you next time. Bye. Never miss a push. Head to yourcreativepush.com/subscribe to find the easiest way for you to subscribe to the podcast.